The door opened so quietly that almost no one noticed. The cafe was buzzing with the usual late afternoon crowd, cups clinking, soft music floating through the air, and the smell of fresh coffee wrapping around every corner of the room. I was wiping down the same table for the third time, my mind somewhere far away, when the entire atmosphere shifted in a way I can still feel in my chest when I think about it. She walked in like someone who had nowhere else left to go, and yet she carried herself with a strange kind of dignity that made the entire room seem to pause for a second. By the time she left that evening, she had changed something inside me so deeply that I was left completely speechless. Before we continue, if you believe that small acts of kindness can change lives, take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who believes in second chances, and subscribe to the channel, The Kindness Chronicles. Your support helps spread stories that remind the world that humanity is still alive. At that time in my life, things weren't exactly great. I was 27, working double shifts at a small cafe tucked between an old bookstore and a laundromat on a quiet street that most people in the city barely noticed. It wasn't the kind of place people traveled across town to visit. It was the kind of place people ended up in when they were tired, lost, or just needed somewhere warm to sit for a while. My life had slowly shrunk into a routine that felt smaller every day. Wake up before sunrise, unlock the cafe, brew the first pot of coffee, serve customers with the same polite smile, and close the place late at night when the streets outside grew silent. Somewhere between rent, bills, and the quiet disappointment of dreams that never quite worked out, I had stopped expecting anything meaningful to happen. The cafe itself had a certain charm though. The wooden floor creaked with every step. The walls were lined with mismatched frames and faded photographs of the neighborhood from decades ago. There was a large window at the front where sunlight poured in during the afternoons, painting warm golden rectangles across the tables. Regular customers had their usual spots. Mr. Daniels sat near the window every morning reading newspapers. A college student named Maria typed endlessly on her laptop while nursing the same cup of tea for hours. A retired couple came every Thursday afternoon and shared a slice of chocolate cake. It was a quiet, predictable world. And then she walked in. The first thing people noticed was her coat. It was far too thin for the cold outside, and it looked like it had been worn through more winters than anyone could count. Her shoes were scuffed and damp from the rain that had started earlier that afternoon. But it wasn't the worn clothes that caught my attention. It was her eyes. They held the kind of exhaustion that only comes from fighting battles that no one else sees. Yet there was also something else there, something stubborn and alive. A quiet strength that refused to completely disappear. She stepped inside slowly, almost cautiously, like someone who wasn't sure if they were welcome. A few customers glanced up briefly and then returned to their conversations. But I couldn't stop watching her. Something about the way she carried herself made it impossible to look away. She didn't approach the counter right away. Instead, she stood near the door for a moment, letting the warmth of the cafe wash over her like it had been a long time since she had felt it. Then she walked toward the far corner of the room and sat at a small table near the window. I remember noticing that she didn't take off her coat. After a few minutes, I walked over with a menu, even though I had a feeling she might not order anything. Her hands were wrapped tightly around themselves, as if she were trying to hold on to the little warmth she had found inside the cafe. She looked up at me and gave a small smile. It was the kind of smile people give when they don't want anyone to worry about them. I placed the menu on the table and told her to take her time. She nodded quietly. But 10 minutes passed, then 20. She didn't touch the menu. She just sat there looking out the window at the rain sliding slowly down the glass. The cafe had started to empty as the evening approached. The usual after-work crowd had come and gone. Chairs were being pushed back, coats pulled on, and quiet goodbyes exchanged. But she stayed exactly where she was. Eventually I walked back over to her table, this time carrying a cup of hot tea. I set it down gently in front of her. She looked surprised. Her eyes moved from the cup to my face, as if she was trying to understand why someone would do that for her. I told her it was on the house. For a moment she didn't say anything. Her fingers slowly wrapped around the warm cup, and I could see the steam rising between us. Then something unexpected happened. Tears filled her eyes. Not loud crying, not dramatic sobbing. Just quiet tears that seemed to appear all at once, like they had been waiting for the smallest kindness to finally break through. She wiped them away quickly, clearly embarrassed. But I had already seen them. And in that moment, I realized something simple yet powerful. Sometimes people don't need grand gestures. Sometimes they just need someone to notice they exist. Over the next hour, the cafe became quieter than usual. Only a few tables remained occupied. The rain outside had turned into a steady downpour that made the streetlights shimmer against the wet pavement. She slowly drank the tea, holding the cup carefully like it was something precious. Eventually she stood up and walked to the counter. That was when I noticed something else. She moved like someone who carried an invisible weight on her shoulders. Not physical exhaustion alone, but the kind of emotional weight that comes from too many disappointments, too many closed doors, too many people turning away. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a few coins. She placed them carefully on the counter, counting them twice. Then she looked up at me with an expression that I will never forget. It was a mixture of hope and fear. Hope that it might be enough. Fear that it might not be. Before she could say anything, I gently slid the coins back toward her and shook my head. I told her the tea was already paid for. She hesitated, clearly unsure whether to accept that. But then something softened in her expression. For the first time since she walked in, her smile looked real. Not polite. Not forced. Real. She thanked me quietly. And then she did something I never expected. Instead of leaving right away, she asked if she could sit for a little longer. Of course I said yes. The rain kept falling outside, turning the city into a blur of reflections and quiet lights. Inside the cafe, the warmth and silence created a strange little bubble that felt separate from the rest of the world. That evening turned into one of the most unforgettable nights of my life. Because over the next few hours, I would slowly learn pieces of her story. And every piece would remind me of something we often forget. That behind every tired face walking through a door, there is a story we cannot see. A story of struggle. Of loss. Of courage. Her name was Elena. And the way she had walked into that cafe that day was not the beginning of her story. It was the moment just before everything started to change. For her. And for me. As the night grew darker and the last customers finally left, the cafe became quiet enough that the ticking of the wall clock sounded unusually loud. Elena sat by the window, occasionally glancing outside as if the rain carried memories she couldn't quite escape. Little by little, she shared parts of her life. She spoke about a childhood that had been anything but easy. A home filled with shouting instead of laughter. Dreams that had once been bright but slowly dimmed by circumstances she had no control over. She had worked hard, harder than most people I had ever met. 2 jobs at times, sometimes 3. Trying to stay afloat in a city that didn't slow down for anyone. But life has a strange way of stacking difficulties on top of each other. An illness in the family. A job that suddenly disappeared. Rent that became impossible to pay. And slowly, piece by piece, the ground beneath her feet had disappeared. Yet even as she told her story, she never spoke with bitterness. Only quiet honesty. That was what amazed me the most. Somewhere along the way, despite everything she had faced, she had not allowed the world to harden her heart. She still believed that people could be kind. She still believed tomorrow might be better. And as I listened to her that night, something inside me shifted. I realized that while I had been complaining about my routine, about my small cafe job, about the life that felt stuck, someone else would have seen it as a blessing. A warm place. A steady job. A roof over their head. Perspective can change everything. The rain finally stopped sometime after midnight. The street outside was quiet and empty. Elena stood up slowly and thanked me again for the tea, and for listening. But before she reached the door, something inside me told me this moment mattered more than I understood. So I asked her one simple question. If she would like to come back tomorrow. Not as a customer, but as someone who could help out around the cafe. It wasn't much. Just a few hours here and there. But it was a start. For a second she simply stared at me, stunned. Then her hands covered her mouth as if she was trying to hold back another wave of emotion. That night, she walked in looking like someone the world had forgotten. But she left with something she had almost lost. Hope. And I stood there by the counter long after she had gone, realizing that the smallest moment of kindness can sometimes open the door to the biggest changes. Weeks passed. Then months. Elena became part of the cafe. Customers who once barely noticed her now greeted her by name. Her quiet strength slowly turned into confidence. Her laughter filled the room in a way that made the cafe feel brighter. But the most incredible part was watching how she treated others. Every customer who walked through that door was greeted with the same warmth she had once desperately needed. She remembered names. Favorite drinks. Little details about people's lives. And the cafe transformed into something more than just a place to buy coffee. It became a place where people felt seen. All because one person had walked in during a rainy afternoon, carrying more pain than anyone could see. And today, years later, whenever someone asks me why I believe kindness matters, I remember that moment. The door opening quietly. The rain outside. And a woman who walked in looking like she had nothing left. But walked out with a future. If this story touched your heart, please take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who needs a reminder that kindness still exists, and subscribe to The Kindness Chronicles.